For the past 100 days, I've been working on my own game engine, and a few weeks ago, I decided to completely delete everything that I had and restart from scratch. I made a lot of mistakes in the original version, many of which I've fixed in my second iteration, and so in this video, I'm going to really quickly explain how everything works using Minecraft. So, how does it work? Well, the main difference between this and my previous one is that my old engine was more of a 3D first-person shooter thing, and this one is really just focused on 2D platforming games. It's inspired by Animal Well, so it uses a lot of similar tricks to what that game does. My old engine allocated a lot of stuff on what's called the heap, so just gotta clear this off. So let's imagine that this line here represents my RAM. So if I create an entity, maybe like a player or an enemy or something, it uses up this much space. And then if I create another one, maybe another player or another entity, it uses up a different amount of space if it's a different thing. And then maybe I spawn in like a gun or a level or something, and it uses up that much. But then let's say I want to delete one of these things. So if I delete this second one, maybe it's an enemy, suddenly I've got a big gap here. And so if I do this a bunch, creating a bunch of stuff as it appears in the game, and then deleting it later, I end up with all of these gaps in the memory. Now sometimes you have a big one like this, and then as you create another new thing, it can fill in this gap, but sometimes the gaps are just too small to fill something in if you want to make something really big, so it's got to go all the way at the end. And over time, this problem can just get worse and worse and worse, and you can have pretty bad performance since every time you need to create a new thing, it needs to search through all of your memory to find holes that it can fit itself into. But it also creates some bad performance issues with the game in general just as it's running. Because each frame you need to loop over all of these objects to update them, but they're not really in predictable positions, so you need to track where all of them are and then kind of jump around in a random order to access all of them, and that is not very great for computers to do. And if you run out of space completely, then your game is just going to crash and everything's going to be terrible. But luckily, we don't really have to worry about that because it's a small game. So what does the new version of my engine do differently? Well, first of all of the game's data is packed together as much as possible. So when the game starts up, it first just allocates a whole bunch of memory. Even if it's not using all of it yet, it still reserves it just in case it needs to. This works pretty well on modern computers because they don't actually use the physical RAM until you touch the memory for the first time, but they do allocate space for you so that if you need it, you have it. So now we've got one big strip of memory for our whole game, and we don't have to worry about anything else on the computer, like taking some spots in the middle and making us jump around. Besides that, there is some stuff for actually happening in the game that you can't predict beforehand, like if you walk into a new screen and spawn an enemy or something. So what the new version of the engine does is it just keeps a bunch of space reserved like this for anything that could happen in the game, and then as you spawn, let's say an enemy, it takes up some space like that, and then you spawn something else, it takes up space right next to it, and this is guaranteed, and then spawn another thing. All of this stuff is taking up space right next to each other. And then if you want to delete something, instead of deleting it in the middle, the only way to delete something is to completely delete everything before it and just go back all the way to this spot here. This way you're forced to think more about the lifetimes of things and how long they actually last in the game. So let's say with the Pong example, there's the main menu, which could be this. And then as you exit the main menu, it deletes all of the data that it has for that, and then creates this pause menu and starts the game. It creates the left player and the right player and the ball. And then all this data is just stored like that. And so if you want to pause the game, the pause menu turns on, it keeps all that data there. And then if you exit the game and go back to the main menu, it just deletes all of this and then creates the main menu again. And because all of this space is right next to each other, it's really easy for the computer to just loop over all of it and update all of it with really fast performance. And it's also really easy to create new stuff and delete stuff, and it runs very well. It also means that the game will never ever crash because I've already created all of the space for everything beforehand. So as long as I don't exceed that space, which I can make absolutely massive if I want to, then it'll just never have any reason to crash. Now, obviously, this doesn't work for every single type of game out there, but for something specifically like Animal Well, it actually works perfectly because you create the stuff that's needed for the game in general, and then as you move from one screen to another, you create everything that goes on that screen, and then as soon as you move off that screen, all that stuff is deleted, and then you create new stuff right away. If you do want to have some stuff that randomly gets created and destroyed, what you can do instead is just create space for all of it right at the start, like this. Let's say we have we want to be able to randomly create and destroy 100 different enemies as you kill them. Then we just create the space for 100 enemies. And then whenever we need one, we maybe just turn it on right there. And so that one's turned on. Oh wow, it's turning foggy. And then turn off this one because we killed it. And so that way you already have the space for the maximum amount of enemies you'd ever need. And you don't really need to worry about all these complicated systems that the computer has to do to create and destroy them randomly. So what were some of the mistakes that I made with my original version of the game engine? Well, first of all, I was trying to make it 3D, which was just a bad idea, because honestly, I wasn't going to make a 3D game all by myself, and I wanted to do something a lot faster than that anyways, so it didn't really make sense to be spending so much time working on something that was way more complicated than what I needed. But that brings me into the second point. It was way more complicated than what I needed. The old version of the engine was a lot of really interconnected systems that kind of fought with each other in a lot of ways and were really hard to think about and keep track of. The new version, in comparison, is much cleaner and everything is completely separated from each other, so it's very obvious what each part of the code does and it's only contained to that specific part. I've also completely separated everything that's part of the actual game engine and logic from everything that's part of Windows and the rendering, which changes depending on which system you're making it for. Having this separation makes it a lot easier to make stuff for the engine because you don't have to worry about how it's going to interact with stuff in Windows. You can just make them completely separately, and if there's a bug, you just fix it here and it automatically fixes it for everything that uses it there. The last mistake that I made was underestimating how long things would take and trying to make every feature that popped into my head as soon as I thought of it. So on the old version of the engine, as soon as I thought of making something, I would instantly add it in, or try to add it in as much as I could, and then if I got bored with it, I'd start adding something else. And I ended up with a bunch of half-completed features that didn't really add up to anything that you could actually play, and the whole thing just became a massive mess. With the new version, I tried to prioritize doing stuff as fast as possible, but instead of doing half-baked versions of every feature, I would just pick one feature that I absolutely needed to have and completely finish the smallest possible version of it. And then as soon as I did that, I would move on to the next feature, and I would only make it for exactly what I needed in that moment, and I wouldn't try to think about what I would need in the future or anything like that. I would just make only the bare minimum. So for an example, my sound system, my old engine didn't even have sound support at all because I never made it to that stage. But in my new engine, the first version I added would allow you to play as many sounds as you wanted. There was a limit, but you could set it to something like 128. And each time you played a sound, it would randomly select from one of those 128 slots to put the sound into. And then each time that sound would finish, it would empty out the slot. And so you'd be able to keep playing sounds and adding them to different slots, and then they'd finish in other slots. But that makes things really complicated because let's say you want to stop a sound, now you need to know exactly what slot it's playing in, and you need to make sure that no other sounds have started playing in that slot. The old way of playing sounds is the game would create a list of commands that it would send to the sound system. And so if you tried to play a sound and you were out of slots, then that sound just wouldn't play. But the game would have no way of knowing if it didn't play, and the number of slots that you had filled was not something that was predictable because it depended on how fast your computer ran. Like if you wanted to play 4 sounds here, and then one of these sounds should have been stopped, but you lagged, then you wanted to play another sound, it would be full. Even if you hadn't lagged, it would have been empty and you would have been able to play that sound. That created some inconsistency that happens in a lot of game engines, but it's not something that I wanted to add in if I didn't really have to do it. So I completely deleted that version of the sound system and created a new one. And this one was a lot simpler. There are 2 channels for sounds, and instead of sending commands which you can run out of space for, each channel... I want to kill this guy. And instead of sending commands which you can run out of space for, this new version just has whichever sound is playing in which channel and when it started. So if you play a sound in the music channel and then one in the game channel, then it'll just be like that. And then if you want to replace it in the music channel, you would just play a new sound in there and it would completely take over. And then the program that's actually running the sounds would just look at what sounds you currently have set and it would just play those. It was a lot simpler, but it can only play 2 sounds. But I don't need to play more than 2 sounds. I just have the music and then the game sounds. So for example, pausing the game, you need to pause all the sounds and then restart them in the same points that they were at before. With the old system, that could have been really complicated to do, especially since you need to play sounds of the pause menu and stuff, while having all the other sounds paused. But with this system, it was really easy because you just copy the state of this somewhere else. And then since you're now paused, you start playing the pause menu sounds. And then as soon as you unpause, you just delete that and copy this back in, and then it just works. I took that same exact approach for everything in the engine, and it made development way faster. In the months since I've redone this new version of the engine, I've made so much more progress than I had in the 3 months leading up to it. And I've almost got a fully working Pong prototype right now. So what is there left to do? Well, I have 6 things left to do before I'm completely done with Pong and can start on the puzzle game that I'm going to make. First thing is rebindable inputs. This can be pretty tough to add in later on, so I'm going to make sure that it's in the first version of the engine that I'm using for an actual game, and I know that it's something that players do want to see. The second is maybe a dev console, but I'm not really too sure about that. I think I might be overcomplicating things again, so I might not do that one yet. The next is sound fading. It's a nice to have feature, but I don't really need it just yet, so I might save that. Audio compression is similar. Right now, all of the audio files in the game take up about 20 megabytes, even though there's not too many of them. And that could really be dropped down to just 1 megabyte. But it's really something that I can save for later and I don't have to worry about integrating too much into the engine. I'd also like to have user settings, because right now there's no way to store settings like if you prefer full screen or not, so I'd have to add that. And I would also like to lower the minimum requirements, because right now it requires a GPU that can do shader model 6.0, and I would really prefer to lower that down to 5.0, but it'll take some rewriting of some of the shaders, and I wouldn't really like to do that just yet. And one last thing, because the engine is so straightforward and linear like this, it makes it really easy to add in multiplayer support. So I've considered that. I don't think it really makes sense for the game that I'm making, so I haven't done it just yet. But if a co-op mode does make sense, I might do that. And kind of in the same vein as multiplayer, because it works with similar technology, saving games is also really easy because of this. So you can just copy everything in here into a save file, and then you've just saved the entire game. Anyways, I hope this video makes sense. It seems very incoherent to me, but we'll see. I don't know if anyone is actually interested in this stuff, so I don't know if I should keep making it. And I've gotten a lot of new subscribers recently who might not be interested in exactly this stuff that I've been doing. But working on this game engine is what I'm doing for like 90% of my free time, so I'm kind of gonna make videos about it anyways. I'm sort of trying to bridge the gap a little bit here by explaining it in Minecraft, but it also just helps visualize stuff, and it would have been pretty boring just showing a bunch of text while I'm doing this. Anyways, hopefully I can edit this down because the concept was supposed to be 2 minutes, but I've been recording for an hour.